One thing that could be helpful to do as you look at the solutions to this is I'm going to make some notes for kind of like what we want to do line by line, and then you can check and see if your code matches, if you wrote code that does that, and then we can see if they're the same as my solution. So we have this, for this first problem, num matches, we have this array list all pairs to work with. And here's really what we want to start out with. Notice that it is an int. So the first thing I have to do is create a variable. And since it's counting something, I want to set it to 0 to start. Then what I want to do is I want to loop through the word pairs in the array list. There's a bunch of word pair objects that each have 2 names. And I want to count the number of word pair objects where the first and second are equal. So here's our structure from before. Before each loop, an if statement that checks a particular condition. Well, our condition was check if the 2 words are equal. And I'll specify even further, check if first word is equal to second word. And if the 2 are equal, I'm counting. I'll make sure that I add 1 to the count. So I think you can write this program in 5 lines, my bad. You have to return your variable at the end. Don't forget to do that. I almost forgot it here. You can write this in about 4 lines of code. So like, let's see how each of these actually translates into practice. Create a variable instead of 0. Let's start with the easy ones. We can kind of go from there if we need to. ++ under some situation. And we're going to loop through something. The format says we need a for loop. So we know it's going to be for something. And then we're checking something that's going to be an if statement. And if it's true, we'll add 1. So it's kind of like the basic layout of this problem. And you'll notice that it looks the exact same as our counting function here. I defined a variable. I have a for loop. I have an if statement. I add 1 to it, and then I return it at the end. Those lines line up just up with our count algorithm from before. So the question is, what are we looping through? And how do we write a for each loop here? Well, my array list is named all pairs. And this is a quick reminder of the way that a for each loop works. I put the type of thing it's looping through. I put some sort of variable name. So I'll just call this W for word pairs. And then I'm going to put the name of the array list, which is all pairs here. So now I've written my for each loop. That's going to loop through each one and identify and use it as we go through today. Now I want to check something. 2 things to remember when you're checking something. How do you check every single thing inside of a for each loop? Well, now you've made this variable W that represents all the word pairs. So whatever you call on W will be called on everything. Write down that W first if you weren't feeling comfortable about it. And we started this class by getting some methods. We wanted to compare the first word and the second word. Well, my class word pair has the methods get first and get second, but I can call on W the same way that maybe you did for your homework in class the other day. And all I'm going to do there is check to see if they're equal to each other. Take a moment and remind yourself before I say it. Why is dot equals required in this problem? It's because we're comparing 2 strings. And so my second string, W dot get second, goes inside of dot equals there. This is a pretty complete solution to the first problem, in case you want to take a look. And let's start the second part here. We have an array list of integers to work with. So just to remind us that you can use that in this method. Anything that's a variable at the top of the page can be used. and it's called digit list this time. And I said the check algorithm was going to be helpful for me here. The first thing I need to do in a method is create a variable of the return type. So I'll create a Boolean variable here. And of course, my last line will be returning it at the end. And I said the structure from the top here for any of these problems is there's a for each loop that iterates through the values, some sort of if statement that checks if a particular condition is relevant, and a change in the variable of the return type. So I need a for each loop to iterate, an if statement to check the condition, which is it increasing? Are all of these numbers that are stored in that array list in a row increasing over each other? And if it's the case, I want to change it, I'll flip that Boolean. You can notice when we look at this that this will be pretty similar to that check algorithm from before. So I'm going to start with Boolean check and return the check at the end. And I'm hoping that we're feeling pretty good about the array lists so far. So you should be able to write for every index in digit list here. So loop through this and it'll look at all of the values for you. You'd probably be able to use a for loop for this one because we're not really changing the amount of information in it. So like you could do index and digit list, or you could also do for this problem. If I accidentally pulled that Boolean check there. You know, you could do your normal for loop. You can take a quick reminder to yourself. What does X represent here versus what does X represent here? This is going to represent every integer, every value in that list. Well, instead, that's going to represent every index. And now I need an if statement. And at the end, I'm going to flip the Boolean. Now, when we look at our normal check for a condition code, it starts with check equals false. And if it encounters something that's true, it returns the check. So knowing that, here's what our program would do. It would set check equal to false, and then it would check if every single value in this was increasing. And then it would flip it to true if it's the case, and then we'd be done with it. But this is a really tricky one that the AP exam will throw at you a lot, where they ask you to compare a bunch of things that are increasing or meeting a condition in a row. And it's really annoying to compare all of them, to compare every single one. What you'd almost have to do is like count up the number of times it's true, and then like compare it to something at the end to make sure that it matches the number of values. But there is a much easier way. The easier way is to check if it decreases at some point. The easiest way to do this is to check if it decreases at some point. So here's where this is going to be a little bit interesting. I'm going to assume that it's increasing at the start. And then if it's decreasing, if I find evidence that it is, I'd change it to false. And now all my if statement needs to do is to check and see if at one particular value, it's actually decreasing. You know what, friends, as I've watched this, I've realized that it's a little bit tricky to compare things to each other. Remember that X represents every integer inside of this array list? Well, we have X, but it's also really challenging to compare it to the thing that's directly next to it. What we would want to know is if the thing in our current position is bigger than whatever comes after. So we can do something like this. Which would pull us the index of X, which is a value, and add 1 to it. And then check and see if that is less than whatever the value was that was to the left of it. But I actually think this is gonna be my for each solution. So I'll pull this part of the code here. But I think it's also possible to do this with your typical for loop because it has access to the values already. So it's going to be a little bit easier to work with. So let's try it that way. If I change this to a for loop in this case, since I'm not deleting anything or adding anything, it should be okay. And then in my if statement, all I need to do is see if the current digit list is greater than the digit list that comes after it. And this will check and see if my current is greater than the next one, flip it to false if it is, and check it from there. The one little modification you need to make to your for loop here is that it'll be a -1. So there are a couple different ways to do this. I realize that this is, just to clarify, this is my for each solution. And because we're messing with indexes here, this was my for loop solution. This is something that even tripped me up a little bit as I was looking at it. Take a long look at the problems and see if you have any questions on it. These are the things that AP likes to do that are based in what we do, but there's a little bit of detail that kind of comes from everywhere as we try to figure it out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all in class next week.